All right, folks. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tracy Hinkey. I am the Executive Director of the Gender Equity Network. And our organization is centered on working with sex and gender-based discrimination and issues of disparity and outcomes all across the United States and the world. We're particularly interested in this particular topic because there's quite a bit that happens with boys and young men, especially in the United States today. You know, that's where we're based, and we see quite a bit of disparity in pretty much every area of their lives. And as we've heard plenty of details about today, and I can't wait to hear what Jennifer has to say. She is quite an expert, and I don't know, many of you may know that she has, it was news to me, I was very excited to find out about. She is the host of the podcast On Boys, which is absolutely fantastic. And we have also had the pleasure of having her be interviewed on, she has been interviewed by us on our website views and our videos. And you'll have to forgive me, the piece of paper that I had has closed. But we're very excited to hear her speech today about raising great guys in a world that misunderstands males. Jennifer Fink is definitely a wonderful entertainer. She is also the founder of Building Boys, and she has she's an internationally published writer, a mom of 4 sons, the author of the First Time Mom's Guide to Raising Boys and Building Boys, Raising Great Guys in a World That Misunderstands Males, which will be out in April. Her articles about boys have been published by the New York Times, Fox News, The Washington Post, Parents Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, Parade, and Scholastic Teacher. And she also publishes the Building Boys Bulletin, a weekly newsletter about parenting and educating boys. It is my great pleasure to introduce Jennifer Fink.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I love it when I hear my accomplishments summed up in 3 sentences and you cut out all of the bad parts and you cut out all of the toil and you cut out the reality of parenting 4 boys over 20 plus years, which is, as everybody here can imagine, it's messy. It's not all great guys. There is the screaming and crying and bickering, and we haven't had any darts in the face, but we have had other incidences that have led us to ERs in the past. So that's the reality of raising boys. I didn't know all of that though. 25 years ago, when my first son was born, okay, nearly 25 years ago when he was born, I did not know that I would be raising boys in a world that misunderstands males. I didn't know that the world misunderstood males. I'm not a boy. I've never been a boy. I grew up female. I'm acutely aware of the issues that women and girls face, but I didn't know what it was like to be a boy. By the time my second son was born, I started realizing that there was a lot that I didn't know about boys. And it's about that time that I discovered the work of Michael Gurian, which helped me tremendously. Shortly after my oldest son entered school, and by this time I had 3 boys, I began to realize that schools, teachers, and society misunderstand a lot about boys, because I realized that my boys were not the only ones struggling in a system that didn't seem to see them or understand them. I know that we have covered some of this morning with Michael Gurian, with Marion's talk, with our panel. And so at this point, I'm guessing that a lot of you are well on board with this idea that there's a lot of misunderstanding about males. But if you get a chance, I'd like to hear, there's not a ton of us here. If you even want to unmute and just tell us a little bit about what's your experience with that and what brought you to this, I'd appreciate that. And if you'd prefer to drop it in the chat, that's fine as well. A little bit about me that Tracy did not already cover. These are my books. The First Time Mom's Guide to Raising Boys came out last year. I'll be honest, the title is a little misleading because it's really about tween boys. That's what that formative years means over here. And this picture of me and my guys, I'll just tell you a little bit. I have 4 sons, and the oldest is the one back there holding the weapon. What was that? Some Nerf gun, of course. This was a few years ago. The oldest is Nathan. He is currently 24 years old. He's a performer at Dollywood. Tyler is to my right in this picture. He is in his senior year of college. Adam in the white hoodie is in his second year in a tech program, automotive tech program. Oh, I apologize, Tracy. Let me fix this, okay?
You're not sharing it.
Yes, I will fix that. I am so sorry, everybody. Let me get to the right.
No sweat. We're working that right brain creativity. That's all.
Right? I have to make this bigger. You know, raising boys is much more my forte than Zoom. So I will just be real with you about that. And I have to go to full screen. And I'll get this. Share screen. We'll get it. All right. And I have to make that big. All right. Now can you see me in my guys?
Yes, you're good to go.
Yeah.
All right. So those are my four guys. Couple years ago, Nathan in the back there, performer at Dollywood, Tyler, senior year of college, Adam in the white hoodie is in his second year of an automotive tech program. And Sam, he looks much older now because now he's 16 and he's headed to homecoming tonight. So those are my boys. And that's a pretty good picture of our dynamic, kind of goofy, kind of silly. And why is that the picture I'm sharing with you, even though it was probably 2 or 3 years ago? Because you try getting 4 boys together in the same picture at this age. Apologies, I got booted out for a second. Can you hear me again?
Yes, ma'am, you're good and live.
All right. Sometimes people will ask me, how does the world misunderstand boys? Surely you must be wrong. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because most of us here this morning. I think it boils down to 2 major misconceptions. A misunderstanding of male development. And Dr. Gurian referred to this briefly, but long story short is boys take much longer to develop and mature than their female counterparts generally. It's just a difference. As adults, we get to basically the same point with some individual differences, but there's a tremendous difference between a 5-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. The brain development of a 5-year-old boy is not at the same level as a 5-year-old girl. The parts of the brain that handle language, that control the fine motor skills, so important for writing, aren't there in a 5-year-old boy the same way they are in a 5-year-old girl. The same is true with teenage boys. All of you who are here and work with teenage boys, you know this. You have experienced it. I'm living it. Big difference between a 17-year-old girl and the average 17-year-old boy. Huge difference. The world misunderstands male vulnerability. And this is one of those things where there's this idea, and it's not entirely misplaced, there's idea that men and boys are strong, and they are. But that doesn't mean that they're not susceptible to stress. That doesn't mean that they can't have issues with things like body image. That doesn't mean that physical and emotional stressors don't harm them as well. And yet just last week, I ran across not 1, but 2 articles that said, contrary to conventional wisdom, and the one was, boys can also get eating disorders. And the other was, contrary to conventional wisdom, teenage boys can also have low self-esteem. When our society and our school and our parents, when we operate from these misunderstandings, we miss so much. These misunderstandings affect nearly every part of our boys' lives because so many of our interactions with them are based on what end up being false premises and false facts. No wonder things go poorly. If we are interacting with our boys based on thoughts and ideas that aren't true, there's a tremendous mismatch. Our boys feel misunderstood. We are not filling their needs, and that's a problem. Here's the challenge for all of us right now, right? we're not going to change those misunderstandings today. Now, those of us who are at this conference, those of us who are here in this breakout room, yes, we are challenging those misunderstandings right now. And I trust that we're all going to go and spread this in our communities and with our friends and with others. But the fact of the matter is that cultural change takes a long time. Systemic change takes a long time. Mark Sherman, I know that you are in here. I know that, you and I have talked off and on for the better part of my boys' lives. You've been doing this for 30 years and you haven't seen much movement. My boys went from little boys to mostly grown guys in this time. I couldn't wait for the culture to change. It would be ideal if it did, but my mission was to raise great guys in this world that misunderstands males. The good news is I am here to tell you that it can be done. Now, little caveat, I'm saying great guys. I am not saying perfect guys. I am not saying that if you follow these strategies and use these strategies, that you will never have any challenges or problems. You will, because boys, just like all of us, they are human. But when you use these techniques, when you learn more about boys, you can insulate your boys. You can't prevent harm from happening. You can't totally prevent misunderstandings from affecting him, but you can insulate him by wrapping him in this layer of love and understanding and acceptance. So I'm going to share with you today 4 strategies that I have used and that you can also use to help boys become great men. All right. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions or comments that we need to address at this point? Tracy?
We have one question from Sheldon Hess. The first one that is, what is something people need to understand about reaching boys?
Ooh, I'm going to address that one in my, I'm going to go through these 4 strategies and I'll address it with this first one.
Okay.
Here we go. Strategy number 1. Create safe spaces for them to be who they are. Sheldon, I think that this is key. And this gets to what Dr. Gurian mentioned earlier today. He used the term or the phrase, nurture the nature. And he also talked about how when we do that for our boys, they have this intuitive understanding and knowing this person understands me. That is huge. Huge. As I was researching my most recent book, I ran across a quote that really illustrates this for me. It is by Dr. Thomas Gordon. He was a 3-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and he developed a parent effectiveness training. And what he said was, whether a child feels that they as a person is unaccepted will be determined by how many of their behaviors are acceptable. So think about that for a moment, and then think about that in the context of the boys that you are parenting, in the boys that you are educating, in the boys that you serve. How often are our boys told, no, stop that, don't, right? We talked earlier today about aggression versus violence and the difference. We talked about the tendency of boys who love each other to express that care via things like throwing darts in the dark in the basement. Y'all couldn't hear me, but I laughed out loud at that because I could totally see my guys doing that. That is absolutely the kind of behavior that gets squashed most places. Understandably so, right? In the case of throwing sharp darts in the dark. But what I'm saying is, even if the world at large is not accepting a lot of our boys' natural inclinations and tendencies, we as parents, as teachers, educators, people who work with boys in community, we can create safe spaces for them to be who they are. So what does that look like? What does that look like? It depends. You have to look at the boys in front of you. So let's say, for instance, you have a boy, as my oldest one, he wanted to take dance lessons when he was 4 years old. in some places, in many places, dance is still not exactly considered an acceptable, air quote, activity for boys.
Jennifer, can I get you to share your screen with us real quick?
Did it, it went off again.
All good.
Okay, yeah, I apologize.
No big deal. No big deal.
I wonder what's up. Full screen, and we'll go to share. Share and back over to here. That was a sneak peek. Okay.
There you go.
All right. So creating spaces within your home, your community, your school for boys to follow their interests, even if those interests aren't accepted at large in the larger community. In my home with 4 sons, this has looked very much like creating space for movement. For a period of time, I had my I'm talking years, everybody, okay? For a period of time, I had my dining room table pushed up against one wall so that there's a very clear path from the living room through the dining room to the Nerf basketball hoop mounted on the doorway by the kitchen. They don't get opportunity to do that kind of hands-on mechanical learning in grade school. They don't do it in elementary school. They don't do it in junior high. We carved out a space in our garage, and I prioritized his time in the garage to tinker equally, if not more important than I cared about his homework, because I saw that this was important to him. Create safe spaces for boys to be who they are. Do any of you have any comment how perhaps that's something you've done, or you have a question about how you would like to do that in your communities, in your schools, with your children? Tracy, if you have something, I'll tackle it now.
Well, let's see. We have got one suggestion that teachers designate a non-contact judo kick area in the back of their classrooms.
Oh,
indeed there is. And we have some other suggestions of, let's see, let me scroll down here. A man's school, like focused locker room. Let's see, schools provide a man's school, like a focused locker room. 100% of young men graduate high school and 90% graduate college. Boys that don't have a lot of people creating safe spaces for them appreciate the people doing this. Yes. And question about your son's father and what his role was in your upbringing.
Okay. So one thing about the other boys appreciating the safe spaces, here's a great thing for the parents too. As you create a space for boys to be who they are, guess what? Their friends will gravitate over too. Yes, this may mean more noise, mess, and chaos, but you're getting to know the people that your guys are hanging out with, which becomes absolutely invaluable as time goes on. As far as the boy's dad, I was married to the boy's dad for almost 20 years. And so he was around for the first part of this. When we separated and eventually divorced, we are both still very involved in their lives. Boys go back and forth between mom's house, dad's house. So they have regular contact with both of us, and they definitely have safe spaces to be who they are in both places. That is for sure. It's my second strategy for you. Educate others and advocate for boys. A lot of people don't know what they don't know about boys. In my experience, most people do not realize that the pace of male development is so different than girls. They don't realize how much we are setting boys up for failure when we are asking a 5-year-old boy to write a paragraph in full sentences by hand. Most boys are developmentally not there yet. They'll get there. They will absolutely get there. But if you're asking them to do something and their brains and bodies aren't quite there yet, you're feeding frustration for them. You're feeding frustration for the teachers, and the boys feel very frustrated. Many of you have seen this in your classrooms, in your families. You have seen and heard from boys who feel like they are failures because they can't do X. X could be writing, it could be reading, it could be the math worksheets. If you help the boys even understand that, hey, your brain is still growing, we're going to work on this in other ways, that at least preserves their self-concept. They feel capable instead of feeling incapable. Educate your boys, educate others, educate the other parents within your community. What I didn't realize until I started looking around and talking to other parents is that my boys weren't the only ones struggling with things like, oh, getting recess taken away because he was wiggly in first grade. Why was he wiggly? Because he'd been asked to sit for too long. When you have these conversations with others, you educate others, now you have more people together. Now you can advocate more effectively. If I just go to the principal and say, hey, not a good idea to send my kid home for moving when he needed to move, I'm one parent. But if I have a group of parents willing to come together and dedicate time and talk about how this is affecting not just our boys' ability to learn, but how then we're recognizing that their behavior is more difficult for the teacher and the other students in the classroom to handle, that this impacts their learning. We can bring in some of the science that Dr. Gurian shared with us. Now we can start to make more of a difference. We're not going to change all the misunderstandings, but we can tackle the ones that are there. Another area where I try to educate others is in this idea of healthy risk taking. Okay. So to be absolutely clear, if it had been my son on that skateboard going down that very steep hill to what looked like the ocean in Dr. Gurian's slide, I probably would have stopped that one. But I would have found a different hill for him, okay? I would have found a different hill. Healthy risk taking is good for our boys. It is how they learn about themselves, their capability, their resilience. I have noticed in my guys and in others, so often boys find the limit by blowing past it. It's almost like they have to go past it and find the consequence, whether that is pain or suffering or a disagreement with friends before they go, oh yeah, okay, that was too far. Next time I won't do that. Or they come up with a better plan if we're talking about something like building a bike jump to go over a picnic table. Totally random example. Sure, totally random. Educating others and advocating for boys can also mean making places for them in the community. Boys want to have a purpose. Vermel, you mentioned this earlier. They want to have action. Dr. Gurian mentioned this. They want to make a difference. And when we say, basically, sit down, listen, learn this, and in 12 years or so, when you graduate school, now you can do things, you're going to lose them. They can contribute right now. I don't care if we are talking about your 2-year-old. He can contribute to the family. 12-year-old can contribute to the community. A 6-year-old can contribute. But it will take some advocacy and education on your part to help make those connections. Because the way our society is structured right now, kids in school, adults do this stuff, and when you're ready, we'll bring you in. I encourage you to try and break down those barriers and to connect your son and the boys that you work with younger folks, with older folks. Find ways where they, your boys, can perhaps mentor and work with those who are younger and where they can learn from those who are older. All right, I'm going to move to strategy number 3. If you have questions, please share them and we'll come back to them in a bit. This is a big one. And yes, I combined a lot here. Model and teach emotional intelligence and healthy relationships. Yeah, so that's everything. I hear so many people get frustrated. We want boys who are respectful. We want men who are respectful. Yes, we do. We need to model that. We, the grown-ups, we have to work on our stuff. We have to work on our emotional control. We have to work on our relationships with others. If we don't interact with others in healthy ways, if we don't manage our emotions in healthy ways, how can we possibly expect our boys to do that? They look to us, they learn from us. So first is to work on your stuff in a very boy-specific way here. Let's recognize that boys learn a lot of this through things like roughhousing and rough and tumble play. So when we put the kibosh on those activities, we are hindering their opportunities to learn about things like boundaries, personal space, consent. You don't have to use those words when your kids are 4 or 6. You can, you don't have to, but you have to recognize that those male ways of interacting are valid, are acceptable, and you can make the space for boys to develop those skills in those ways. Naming and acknowledging your emotions is also important in this, and helping your son, the boys you work with, name emotions. That may take time. It's fine. We're talking about things that you can do over a period of years. Getting comfortable with uncomfortable emotions has been a big part of this for me. I know that Dr. Gurian touched on this in the beginning also, but there tends to be, especially among women, moms, teachers, we feel very uncomfortable around angry males. Even when the males are little, when they're 4, but especially when they're 14, when they're 16, and they become bigger than us. And in many cases, it is because we have experienced or know somebody who has experienced harm at the hands of a male, perhaps an angry male. Work on that. Do what you can to heal that harm, but also to rewire your brain, take a breath, and recognize that this upset boy is not necessarily a threat. This upset boy is a human who needs help and who needs support. Talk to him about how to handle those emotions. I'm just encouraging you in this moment to step 3 here is really about self-awareness, self-knowledge, beginning there, and then we can create and show our boys emotional intelligence and healthy relationships. I have a 4th point, but Tracy, do we have questions we want to tackle right now?
There are a few. One of the questions that we asked in the chat was, how do you advocate for boys in your community? And Brad Leslie pointed out, mom and dad can't do it all alone in isolation. Extended family, uncles, sports, coaches, teachers, all know the societal need, and all adults have a responsibility to raise the next generation. How do you think that we can better implement that in our communities in order to encourage that kind of multifaceted and multi-generational approach?
That is an excellent question. I wish I had a quick and easy do this one answer. I don't, probably to the disappointment of everybody. The answers will be different depending on where you are, depending on your community, and depending on your resources. I think the biggest picture that I can give you is to find others who are also concerned about these topics, and also perhaps even working on them. So you mentioned coaches, and you mentioned there was others mentioned in there, but coaches and other parents. If you can bring some people together, and bringing some people together might be like, hey, do you want to come over to my house for a potluck on whatever night, and just start talking about it. Or let's say, for me, I had kids who played sports. A lot of conversation can happen on the sidelines. You can start talking, then maybe the coach is interested. Hey, let's get a drink after the game, or something like that. You can start talking, start brainstorming amongst yourselves, and then see also if there are other community resources that you can hook into. I mean, if I lived in Phoenix, I would be all over connecting with Marion's Fatherhood Initiative. Find others who are doing similar things, because you may find that there are other people who are further ahead on the path or who have pieces that you don't. As you connect your people, then you can decide collectively where you want to direct your advocacy efforts. So for instance, if you're going to work on tackling issues with boys in education first, then you may aim at how you're going to approach your principal or your superintendent and affect change in that area.
Great. We have another question. What are some examples of healthy risk-taking that schools could embrace in today's academic culture? And for the edges, what works and what's safe?
Healthy risk-taking. I tend to think in the terms of physical, but that's just because of my boys. That's who they were. That's not all kids. So I would love for schools to make space for more healthy risk-taking. There is a movement around the world, not so much here in the United States yet, but coming, hopefully, for things like playgrounds that aren't so safe. And I don't mean to say I want dangerous playgrounds. That's not what I'm saying, but loose parts play and allowing kids to try things like jumping from the monkey bars to the ground without saying no. Finding ways to accept some element of physical risk. I understand that's complicated due to liability laws. I don't know how far we're going to get on that. Healthy risk-taking can also be things like trying out for a play, trying out for the team, maybe giving various kids the opportunity to take on leadership roles in the classroom or in the project, letting a kid lead up an effort to even listening to the kids' ideas sometimes. One of my major complaints with school in general is it is for kids and it's about kids, but nobody really asks the kids what they want or need. Talk to the kids. Ask what they want, ask what would make their days better, and then consider putting them in charge of a piece of that. To me, that's healthy risk-taking.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we have about 10 minutes left if you want to go ahead to your next point.
All right, number 4, stay close, but don't smother, right? How do you find that balance? That's one that we all struggle to find. But here's the big takeaway. Because our boys' brains develop more slowly than female brains, there is a longer period of vulnerability to stressors. Think about that. There's a longer period of vulnerability to physical and emotional stressors. And there's research that shows that premature physical or emotional separation from caregivers is more damaging for boys than it is for girls. At the same time, our cultural conception is boys are independent, they need to do it on their own. And we as the adults in society tend to withdraw from our boys sooner and let them figure out things on their own. That's not good for our guys. They need us to stay connected. I interviewed Kate Stone Lombardi, a mom of boys who wrote a book a few years ago called The Mama's Boy Myth. This idea that moms need to back off or you're going to have a mama's boy. And she talked specifically about the confusing tween and teen years, which are, I think, terrible for everybody. But imagine you're a teen boy and you're going through this and you feel like about yourself, and then your own mother pulls away from you. It can be read by the child as even my own mother or my own father doesn't want to be around me anymore. They still need us. So how do you stay close while you're also giving them space? There's a lot of reading of cues going on here. Carve out time for connection. I know one mom who purposefully leaves early to get to her kid's karate class every week. She tells him so she can find parking, but really she wants like 5 extra minutes in the car with him. Carve out some time. Offer daily warmth. The statistics on how often boys are hugged compared to girls is sad. Now, you might be saying, yeah, okay, but my 14-year-old does not want me to hug him. That might be true. Respect his boundaries. Try offering a fist bump. Watch how boys interact with each other. In my house, it is a sign of affection to punch somebody on the shoulder. That's how my boys interact with each other. I've learned, I've adopted that. One strategy that I learned from a New York Times article and psychologist Lisa D'Amour, it's called the potted plant parenting theory. And this is basically, as your kids get older, sometimes just be the potted plant in the room. So I would make it a point to sort of hang out where they were. I might be on my phone or reading a book or doing something. They knew I was there. They could seek me out if they needed or wanted to, or not. That was a strategy that I use. As boys grow, you also have to give them choices and let them experience consequences. The pace of this will vary with every child. every family. I can answer more questions about that individually later, but the big point here is stay close to your boys, but also give them room to grow. We're going to summarize these 4 points, okay? And I created an acronym for you. CAMS. Create safe spaces. Advocate for boys. Remember, this part includes educating them, teachers, caregivers, coaches, those working with boys also, about boys' development and boys' needs. Model. Our boys can't be what they don't see. If we want them to have emotional control, to have healthy relationships, we have to begin by modeling that and then teaching them. And S, stay close, don't smother. Do we have any other questions we'd like to tackle today, Tracy?
Yes, ma'am, we sure do. It looks like one question that we have was going back to, having kids take extra risks or healthy risks by engaging in activities. And currently, due to budget cuts and all the different financial problems, a lot of schools are shutting down those programs. Yeah. They don't want to, or they can't afford that kind of program. So where can we implement, in community programs, YMCAs, Boy Scouts, are there different ways for us to engage them in those activities, even if it's not supported in schools?
Oof, that is a big picture question. And sadly, it's the reality, right? For so many places. And I mean, boys clubs and girls clubs and YMCAs are also suffering budget and workforce issues right now. Off the top of my head, I think that one thing that we can do is find ways, it's easier said than done, for our boys to contribute to needs in our community, right? Here's a tiny little example. A couple of my guys were deep into fishing. They were so into fishing, and they noticed a lot of garbage alongside the river. You know what? They did a garbage cleanup. Now, in a way, is this healthy risk taking? This was just ended up being my family. But if you encourage the boys in your life to make this bigger, right? Encourage them to invite some other boys, encourage them to take on a role that they're not usually in, then that involves healthy risk taking too. So off the top of my head, find ways where boys can match their talents and interests to needs in the community and let them play a role in that.
Another question is centering on making sure that dad is actively involved in young men's lives, and for single moms to maintain a polite and professional relationship with dad. And I'm just going to add a piece onto that for myself. One of the things I felt as a mother of boys is I have a responsibility to model a different viewpoint of women and, femininity, masculinity, those gender roles, those traditional gender roles to my boys. Yes. That it's not just the father's responsibility, but it's also my responsibility as a mom. How do you think that we can support them in that, in our various strengths?
Ooh, that's a tough one too.
It's not the easy ones.
Right? I know. Where are the easy questions? Definitely moms need to do what they can to support dads and their involvement, and vice versa. Dads need to support mom's involvement. I have been a divorced parent. I'm still a divorced parent. I know that it's a lot easier to tell you what you should do when we are all navigating our own situations. Sometimes there are circumstances beyond your control. Work with what you can, but I will say this, do your best. Do not badmouth the other parent. Do facilitate contact between all parents. All children need all parents. If there is a physical, emotional threat, that's one thing. But in most cases, children will do better with contact with both parents. And that may mean, yes, giving up, quote unquote, your time on a weekend so that your child can go do something with the other parent. I've done that. Their dad has done that for me. And what was the other part? Oh, gender roles. Gender roles. I didn't do a great job at this. We fell into the typical gender divide. He did guy things, I did girl things. After the divorce, though, we were both forced to do other things. And I do think that was a good thing for our boys. In general, Everybody has their strengths in a family. It's more efficient if you play to your strengths, but boys and girls need to know how to cook a meal. Boys and girls need to know how to change a light bulb, how to take out the garbage. There is a chapter in my book that will be out that is actually called Challenge Them with Chores and Caregiving, because that's a piece of boy development that we often leave behind.
Absolutely. That is excellent. Well, we really have had a wonderful discussion here today, and I want to thank you again, Jennifer Fink, author of The First Time Mom's Guide to Raising Boys, and her upcoming book, Building Boys, Raising Great Guys in a World That Misunderstands Males. We are very much looking forward to the rest of the conference, and you've definitely given me a lot to think about. If folks have any other questions, again, please feel free to type them in the chat and we will make sure that we get back to you with those answers, or you could potentially put them into the chat later on today through some of their sessions. We're going to go back now. The next sessions are going to be starting in just a few minutes. So we will just have a few minutes of break. You can feel free to, on the bottom right of your screen, you'll see leave room, and that will direct you back to the main room. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.